consistent or conditional fosters a sense of insecurity, that care is not always available or it is conditional. Now, a common narrative about attachment theory is that people are either secure or insecure, but that is a misunderstanding. Everybody has traces of security and insecurity across all kinds of social contexts, with relationships across the lifespan, in parental relationships, siblings, peers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, neighborhoods, one school system, teachers, mentors. We develop these various inner senses of self, a variety of attachment experiences throughout the lifespan, and some of them are more secure and some are more insecure. So in our view, all of the barriers to compassion that I've been talking about arise when people lose touch with the feeling of security, which on occasion happens for all of us, no matter how secure our upbringing was. And hundreds of studies support this view, that when people feel insecure, they're less compassionate in response to other suffering. And this can then manifest in and exacerbate all those other barriers I mentioned, like feeling alone in suffering, aversion to suffering, and reductive impressions of others. I'm going to skip this slide. I've already kind of covered it, this idea that we have a multiplicity of attachment representations. Now, the good news is that we can all experience a sense of security. And there's hundreds of studies within social and developmental psychology using this technique called attachment priming, which involves temporary recalling of a secure moment, a moment of supportive social connection, or imagining qualities like care, safety, and love. And in just a brief exposure, like 30 seconds or 1 minute, is enough to evoke a felt sense of security. And research shows that it's sufficient to overcome each of the barriers to compassion, if even just for a temporary amount of time. So here's a number of empirical results from these studies that show the benefits of recalling supportive social connection. It leads to greater resilience to threat, better emotion regulation, resistance to the fragility of compassion. So not reducing compassion as the number of people in need goes up. Greater patience listening to others. Reduced cardiovascular reactivity to stress. Reduced pain-related neural reactivity. Reduced prejudice and hostility toward outgroups. And reduced dehumanization toward outgroups. So I think this is really amazing. It's not just like one-off study. This is hundreds of studies that show that simply calling to mind a moment of secure connection can help reduce all of these issues. So this points us back to traditional forms of practice. We can look back into contemplative traditions to see what are the kinds of meditation practices that are available to help cultivate this sense of a relational starting point. And I'm going to speak from traditions of Buddhism because it's the one tradition that I've spent the most time studying. But I think this relational pattern that we see in Buddhism is also apparent throughout the world's religions. We see it in contemplative forms of Christianity, contemplative Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, and indigenous forms of spirituality in North America, Africa, and Asia. So here's some examples from Buddhism. Sutras from the Pali Canon, which are thought to be the closest thing to the original teachings of the Buddha, suggest that just by hearing the words of the Buddha expressing his followers to practice unconditional love and compassion, just by hearing that is like to understand ourselves as supported by the qualities of love and compassion that have been cultivated by generations of practitioners and teachers before us. In Mahayana Buddhism, These themes are extended into practices of refuge and the sense that Buddhas and Bodhisattvas sense into or resonate with a meditation practitioner's enlightened potential. And in the Vajrayana traditions, it's the teacher's job to resonate with this enlightened potential within the student, to empower or initiate the student's own awareness of, or their own access to their own enlightened nature. This is the concept of pure perception. The teacher sees into and resonates with that with the student. This is a quote from an artist that I think captures this point. The word Buddha in Sanskrit means to be awakened, expressed in art. Buddhas are not objects of worship, but mirrors of our innermost being, icons of the journey from ignorance to illumination. So I really like this concept of a mirror. It's like those beings before us who have already awakened to their enlightened dimension are communicating or resonating with that and mirroring that potential, drawing it out from us in a relational way. So we don't have to generate or construct it on our own through our own efforts. It's being drawn out relationally, like a mirror. They're serving as a mirror to evoke that from within us. Now the question is, how can we adapt this into a secular space? So this is something I've been working on. Stasie and I have been working on this, and also in collaboration with others. One of my colleagues, our friend John McCransky at Boston College, has also been working on this with us. And one way that we can adapt this within an open secular space is by giving people a variety of options for populating what we call the field of care. So it could be a simple moment of caring connection with a person or a being, a benefactor, so somebody who's had an impact on our life in an important way. It could be an artist or musician or a writer, somebody whose work in the world, we've maybe never met them, but their work has blessed us in some way. It could be a spiritual or divine figure. So we mean open secular space in that we're not prescribing any particular kind of orientation or framework or philosophical or religious system, but we're just giving people the opportunity to bring their own meaning into the space. So if they have a Christian or Islamic or whatever background it is, they can draw on that within the practice. It could be a special place somewhere out in nature, a moment when you were the loving presence to another person, a moment of caring connection that you observed between others, and so forth. So one example that I like to share often is when I was 6 or 7 years old, sitting in my grandma's kitchen and playing cards with her. So it wasn't like there was like a perfect or profound relationship with her. I mean, she was an amazing person, and it wasn't that she was doing anything special in that moment. She wasn't actually saying anything to me. It was just us sitting there playing cards in her kitchen. And it was like, kind of like things were just basically okay. There was nothing to do and everything was just kind of peaceful, and it was like happy. I was happy to be there and she was happy for me to be there playing cards. So it's a simple moment like that, not the whole relationship. So when we introduce this practice, we're inviting and giving people a diversity of ways to connect with it, and also recognizing that nobody's maybe had the perfect relationship or the perfect upbringing, and we do have trauma in various ways. So we're not looking for the perfect relationship, we're just looking for a simple caring moment, or it could be a spiritual or divine figure if you feel a connection to that. It could also be your own connection with your ancestors, feeling a connection to your lineage of your ancestors, if that's meaningful to you. So I thought what we could do is do a brief practice to experience this, and then they'll take it from there. So let's just take a moment. We've maybe been sitting for a little while. Take a moment to kind of freshen up, stretch out in whatever way your body needs. Feel free to stand up without going too far. And then when you're ready, finding your way to a comfortable position. And so finding a way to a comfortable position, back comfortably straight, not too rigid. And taking a moment to come down from the thinking mind and drop into the body. Feeling the support of the chair or floor beneath you. Feeling the support of the earth coming up to meet you. And feeling the support of the space around and above you. And now bring to mind your field of care, a simple caring moment or benefactor, not as a distant memory, but as if that person or being is here with you now. And they're present to you in that way, taking joy in you, wishing you well, happy that you exist. Sensing you in your deep potential and goodness. And they're communing with you, just resting with you. And notice the caring qualities and loving energy that comes with this moment. Maybe a feeling of warmth, acceptance, ease. Just notice however it is for you. And then just allow these loving energies and qualities to draw you into them more and more. Letting them infuse your whole mind and body into every layer of thought and feeling. And if it becomes too effortful, just take a break for a moment and then recall your field of care again, freshly. noticing the loving energies and qualities that come with it. And accepting these energies into your whole being, every part of you loved in its very being. And now let the visualization fade, but let the caring energy and loving qualities continue to resonate and help, allowing them to help your mind to relax completely, gently falling open like space. So any thought or feeling that arises can just unwind and release within the openness and warmth and clarity of mind, by letting everything be. Thank you. So I wanted to pose a question about that practice that we just did. So there was a moment in the instruction where I asked you to notice any loving or caring qualities. I named a few like warmth, openness, ease, but asked you to notice what it was for you. So if you can you share one or two loving qualities that you noticed, and just using a brief phrase or two, and you can type them into the chat and I'll read them out as they come in. Warmth, joy, full, forgiveness, strength, kindness, light, comfort, courage, love, safety. Great, thank you all. So the important point, oh, and embracing, open, great. So the important point here is that it's not so much about the specific relationship or moment that we called to mind, but that through this relational practice, it's giving us access to qualities like these that you all named from within our own awareness, from within our own mind. So it's not dependent on the one particular person or being. It's just an access point that helps us to access from within our body, within our being. And our hypothesis is then that by repeating this experience, by repeating the experience of connecting with a kind of secure base within meditation, that can then establish an inner core of security to overcome the barriers of compassion, barriers to compassion that I presented. This helps us then that we can become we can establish our own sense of safety and then become a welcoming presence towards others and become compassionately present to our own difficult emotions so that they can begin to relax and heal. And that supports our ability for courage, flexibility, change, and so forth. So I want to thank you for doing that, and I want to turn it over to Stasie, and she's going to share some reflections about her perspective on this.
Thank you, Dr. Condon. And thank you again to Julissa and the organizers. I'm really happy to be here and thankful that Dr. Condon invited me to speak with them tonight. I do like to just give people a little context into myself and where I'll be speaking from. I am Inupiaq, German, Czech, English, and Scotch. I'm a recent graduate of SOU with a degree in psychology and a minor in Native Studies. Um, I am a mother and a longtime practitioner, occasional teacher of Qigong. Um, and I would say the majority of where I speak from, despite now having a degree in psychology, is from my Indigenous background, Indigenous values and spirituality, as well as my studies with Qigong. That being said, it's been really exciting to sometimes relate my lived experiences with concepts in psychology, theories in psychology, and things like that. And with that being said, I just wanted to highlight again some of the three major concepts from sustainable compassion training, which Dr. Condon mentioned, which is receiving, deepening, and extending. I think it's very true that receiving is a very important starting point because you can't pour from an empty cup, as they say. Also, the short meditation that Dr. Condon just led us through, and also the listing of loving qualities in the chat, those qualities, they cross all of our divides, our perceived barriers. They cross cultural, ethnic, religious, spiritual, gender, age divides, all of that. And it's been a really life-changing experience to be able to TA for Dr. Condon. The last couple of years, I've TA'd in his sustainable compassion class for the last 3 years. And it's been amazing to witness students' experiences from the beginning to the end of class. And also it's been interesting to, try and facilitate or help lead students through these conversations, taking into considerations we're coming from all these different backgrounds. I think in particular, this experience of the field of care meditation is very relational. I witnessed students, I would imagine it was the most moving meditation the students experienced, just because, like Dr. Condon was mentioning, we don't all necessarily have a secure base from family, but we can have a secure base somewhere in our life. One of the things I have experienced a lot in my Indigenous community, as well as in Qigong, is the practice of relating one thing to another. So Dr. Condon and I would often spend a fair amount of time, trying to filter out which readings do we want to include for the students, because first of all, there are so many wonderful readings out there. And so it's hard to pare it down, but we also wanted to have a spread. And I think two of the ones that have stuck out to students, one of them is Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail, as well as excerpts from Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. Despite that we are speaking to students from an open secular standpoint, we still draw connections. Braiding Sweetgrass is an Indigenous is a book by an Indigenous author. MLK was Christian. And so I think what was interesting to hear students reflect on after their first experience with the field of care is, like I mentioned in the beginning, that care crosses divides, and it's a very understandable starting point. We did encourage students to have a meditation journal, and similar to what we suggested, we asked you guys to participate in chat, is to daily list where they were prior to meditation and also how the meditation felt to them in that moment. One thing that I was passionate speaking about are sometimes the conflicting emotions that can come up during meditation, whether it's long time, a longer meditation, such as 20 or 30 minutes, or if students are interested in becoming longtime practitioners of meditation. In my experience personally, but also in talking to other longtime meditators and practitioners, um, is that there will sometimes be a point in meditation where it doesn't feel loving and warm, and some of the students would reflect that, even in receiving care, they didn't feel like they were worthy of receiving care, or um, other aspects of feeling like they should be giving it instead. So while the field of care meditation was sometimes, as seen in the chat, loving, it can also bring up feelings of unworthiness. And so how can we help students, bridge that gap or move through those feelings of unworthiness? My Tai Chi teacher would suggest you just keep practicing. But in preparing for this conversation tonight, I was looking up, refreshing myself on social and developmental psychology concepts. And the two that stuck out to me were classical conditioning and operant conditioning. So how I've experienced classical conditioning, which is like the Pavlovian response, is, as a longtime meditator, even just me now taking a deep breath, my whole body's like, okay, I know what we're doing. We need to relax. And I didn't used to use a bell prior to, taking classes with and then TAing for Dr. Condon. But, in TAing with him, even having the bell now is kind of like this Pavlovian response of like coming back to center, um, because sometimes I get in my blissful state of meditation and the mind wanders and things like that. And so the bell kind of draws me back. So that's a good example of classical conditioning of meditation. Um, and a secular example for me of like classical conditioning that students can relate to is like walking in the woods. It's, at least most students, I know some students that don't like going into the woods, but at least for me, being in nature, is just automatically like, we're going to relax now. And to touch on operant conditioning for a moment, which I'll simplify it as pleasurable experiences are likely to be repeated, whereas unpleasurable experiences are less likely to be repeated. To just touch again on that, while there is a loving quality to a field of care meditation that sometimes we can run into, for those students that felt unworthy, that was potentially an unpleasurable experience that they would be hesitant to repeat. However, talking about it, naming it, acknowledging it, in my experience, helped encourage them, to, especially seeing if other students were like, yeah, I noticed that too. All of a sudden, it's okay to not have had a pleasurable experience with meditation, to know that you're not alone, and to maybe with that in mind, be willing to try it again. I think the last thing I'll mention real quick is we did what's called a fishbowl exercise. So we asked students to self-identify into either a student of color or a white student, non-student of color. And we discussed our experiences, not necessarily in relation to meditation or psychology, just on campus as students. And then we came back together. The students of color were in the center, and then the rest of the students were around us. And we discussed our experiences. And I think it was a very eye-opening experience for everyone. What I will touch on, and I wish I could go into more detail, but was, students that were white passing shared that they do have backgrounds of perhaps Japanese ancestry, but they didn't feel like they could go into the students of color group because they appear white passing. And I think for students being able to go through this experience, Dr. Condon and I literally saw how it brought about a conversation that we actually hadn't anticipated. But students going through that conversation, even of, how visually we tend to separate each other in our minds, it helped us build compassion to understand that. And some students even questioned, why couldn't we have, like straight and queer, or like all these different ways that you could break out into separate identities, that when you come back together, you're like, oh, these are actually kind of false barriers, things that we assume about each other based on how we look that keep us separate. So even just doing an experience like that with a meditation before and after helped students build an awareness of compassion for each other. And that was probably one of my most favorite moments in that class. So, these practices really help us overcome our individualistic perceptions of ourselves, as well as overcoming internalized forms of racism, capitalism, and socioeconomic divides. We did want to leave some time for questions or Q&A. So unless Dr. Condon would like to add anything to what I've said, we would love to hear what you guys here perhaps have taken from this little presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Stasie. Yeah, I think it would be good to open it up for Q&A or any responses. I think are we going for another 5 minutes or so, Julissa? Okay.
I would just like to say that that was a beautiful and powerful presentation. So each of you, thank you. And also, I'd just like to comment that we're all, I'm looking at a flat screen and we're all over the world probably, but it feels like we're emotionally connected. So I just want to, comment on the power of the energy and the heart opening across distance, and that you've really done a wonderful job of opening us up to that.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, there really is a power of being here together. I mean, we're here on Zoom, but Zoom is just a thing we're constructing. It's just a thought. And so we're here and we're connected, and there's a power of practicing together. So I'm really grateful to each of you for showing up and being here in this way. So any other questions or reactions?
Dr. Condon, thank you so
Yes.
much for leading such a wonderful practice, and thank you, Stasie, for sharing also. Just a question. My name is Lisa. Okay, so I'm coming from Malaysia. So because I'm also trying to lead that mindfulness or meditation practice among my students before they start the class. So because I'm a